Every day there's stocks that make massive gains in the stock market, and they all have a common characteristic. This week, I'm going to show you what that is. I'll also do my normal analysis of the markets, and then at the end of the video, we're going to take a couple of those big gainers from last week, and I'll teach you the buy and sell points. That's all coming up in this week's Stockscores Market Minutes. All right, so what are the common characteristics of the big gainers? Now, what I mean by big gainers are the stocks that make 50, 100%, 200% gains in a single day. If we know what they are, then perhaps we can catch them early and really know what stocks to watch. Well, on screen now, I've got a list of stocks that were making these dramatic gains this past week. You can see the symbols there, and you can go to the charts and see the kind of gains that they made. Here's some more from Thursday. So what is the characteristic that is common to all of these stocks? Well, the answer is they have a low float. Now you're probably asking, what is a float? A low float is the number of shares that is in the public's hands to trade. So how many shares is available for people to buy and sell in the day? A company could have 50 million shares issued and 30 million shares in the float. The other 20 million shares might be held by insiders and in escrow, and therefore they're not available to trade. So one of the key metrics that I look for, and I'll show you in a moment how I find this, what I look for every day are the stocks that have a low number of shares in the float. Now you can go to a website like Yahoo Finance or FinViz and look up the shares in the float for any public company. Most will display on those websites. What I use is TradeStation. I'll show you that in just a minute. So what are the floats of these particular stocks? Well, if we look at the first one here, AMBO had only 2.62 million shares available to trade. Look at SOBR, only 260,000 shares available. And yet, some of these stocks traded hundreds of millions of shares in a single day. It's really hard to believe sometimes how this can happen, how the float can be turned over so many times. LAES, 16.46, still a low float. What is a low float? Well, to me, anything less than 50 million, I'm willing to look at. Something less than 20 million is ideal. And if you get into the below 10 million, you really have an opportunity for a stock to make a big gain if it's got that low float and a lot of demand. And that's what it's all about. You see, if a stock has some news or it's getting some promotion and it doesn't have very many shares available to buy, and you've got thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of traders chasing after that stock, you can see how the stock can go from 50 cents to $5 in a single day. It's just supply and demand. So that's why we care about low float. So how do these things work? Well, typically a company will issue some news, but it's not just news. There will also be a promotion effort. There are stock promoters who will push that stock on social media, in chat rooms, in social media platforms like Instagram and Twitter. They will push that stock, create the buying demand, and then because there's not many shares available to buy, those stocks can make big gains. Let's go back to our list. We can see some of the floats for the Thursday and Friday stocks. TWG, a big winner on Friday, 2 million shares in the float. That's one of the stocks we'll look at the end of the video. So what I like to do is focus on stocks that have less than 50 million shares in the float, are moving up, and are very actively traded. Ideally, I want the stock to trade more than 100,000 times a day. Now, this that you see on screen now is my desktop, my TradeStation application. TradeStation is a trading program that I use. I've used it for over 20 years, probably closer to 30 to be frank. And in this platform, one of the things that I can track is float. So you'll see here in these columns, and let's draw that in yellow so it's a little bit easier to see. I am quoting the shares in the float. And this particular screen that I have over here looks for stocks that have low float and are actively traded and moving up. Now there's a few different columns here. Number one is the float column, which is the most interesting. Then here I have number of trades, and I rank this screen by the number of trades. And then this second to last column is the percentage change from the open. See, I'm really interested in stocks that are moving up from the open. I don't care if they're up 100% for the day, but they're moving down from the open, because that just means they gapped up at the open of trading and then they moved down, and that's not really of interest to me. So I want to know which stocks are strong, they're moving up from the open, they've got a low float, and are actively traded. And I have a number of screens here on my little dashboard doing that. And this is something that I use in my active live service on Stockscores. You can learn more about that at stockscores.com. Now let's take a look at how some of these low float stocks trade. Now in these charts, I'm not including pre-market action, because you can actually trade these stocks in the pre-market as well. But here you can see the exceptionally abnormal volume. This is TWG on Friday. And then you can see just how much they move. The stock was at $4 at the open. It hit $8 within an hour and a half. If we look at this stock, it opened at $3 and it hit $5.20 within the opening half an hour. Now, before we get into my analysis of the overall markets, just a quick note. If you go to stockscores.com, if you want to learn more about what I do, I've got a free weekly newsletter. You can register for that here. I've also got some events coming up this week where you can learn more about longer term trading, short term day trading, what the tools I use, and some of the different tactics that I use as well. So I encourage you to go take a look at that. All right, now what I want to do is go to the charts of the major market indexes, and we're going to take a look at the S&P first. And here is the S&P 500, and let's analyze whether this is a buy, sell, or hold. So the market here has an upward trend on the daily time frame. The excitement is starting to wane. This is called a rising wedge pattern, and you see that the momentum is slowing. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. There's still no breakdown. If we go to the 1 month chart of the S&P, we can see that the trend is still intact. But if you start to see this move down through that trend line in the next little while, I would be concerned that we're going to start a pullback. No sign of that yet, but certainly a possibility. On the QQQ, the NASDAQ 100, daily time frame in an upward trend, but underperforming the large cap stocks, the S&P 500 stocks. The tech market is sort of lagging that group. If I look at the 1 month chart, I can see that the buyers are in control, so it's still bullish on the NASDAQ stocks in the short term. Let's take a look at the IWM, which is the Russell 2000. This sector of the market has been lagging, but if interest rates start to fall, I think this will be the sector of the market that leads. Now, what's encouraging is on Friday, it broke this little pullback. That means it'll probably come up to resistance here, get stuck, pull back, and ultimately, if we get some more visibility on lower interest rates, I think you'll see this market start to perform well. Let's take a look at the Canadian market, T.XIU. Here is the upward trend intact, really a strong performing market. We're seeing good action in the mining sector, and that is heavily influenced or heavily weighted on the Canadian market. Let's jump to the gold chart, GLD. You can see the trend is up. You can see the trend is up, the buyers are in control, and therefore remains bullish on the gold market. How about oil? All that conflict in the Middle East, is it meaning higher oil prices? Well, we've had a little bit of a push higher in the last week or two, but in the context of the long-term time frame, we don't see really that much in the way of dramatic buying pressure in oil. It'll probably rise up to this resistance level, which is another week of upside perhaps, and then pull back. Until we break out of that trading range, I would say oil's kind of neutral in the longer term. Let's take a look at currencies. US dollar has been rising over the past couple of weeks as investors starting to think that perhaps we won't see the same rate cuts in the US that the market was hoping for. Remains to be seen on that. I'm going to show you another chart which supports that argument in just a moment. But if we jump to the Bitcoin chart, GBTC, it tried to make a little bit of a move on Friday, but in the context of this chart, it's really still in this downward sloping channel. And therefore, I'm still fairly bearish on the crypto market. Finally, let's take a look at the TLT, which is the bond market. And there you can see the dramatic selling pressure we've seen in bonds over the last 2 or 3 weeks. We had nice upward momentum. We've pulled back. I think this probably reverses in the next, probably next week. And the reason why is we've come back to the upward trend line. You can see all of the points that the trend has been hit. We're at that trend line now, so that should mean a bounce higher, and the market will, hopefully start to price in a lower interest rate at the Fed meeting in November. All right, so my ratings then, bullish on both time frames for US large caps, short-term bullish for the NASDAQ, but still long-term neutral for the NASDAQ, US small cap neutral on both time frames, Canadian stocks and gold bullish on both time frames, oil short-term bullish, long-term neutral, US dollar bullish and neutral, Bitcoin neutral on both time frames, and bonds bearish in the short term, but neutral in the long term. All right, at the top of the video, we talked about these big gainers, these low float stocks that make big gains. Well, now I want to show you one of those from this past week. OTRK is the symbol. And the question is, when do you buy them? When do you sell them? Well, here's a good example. So this stock was very active in the pre-market, and it actually made its first buy signal at the open, but I don't think it was the best buy signal. The one I like the best is a continuation pattern that occurred right there. This is a very short ascending triangle pattern. And what's happening there is you have this compression of volatility. What that means, this point here is what I'm drawing over there. All right. So you've got rising bottoms, which is a sign of optimism. I draw a line across the tops, and those lines are converging towards one another, which means you have low volatility right here, which is right there before the price break. So anytime you have a hot stock, a low float stock trading abnormal volume, you get that compression of volatility, and then you break from that compression of volatility. It's a really good pattern for continued strength. So that's one of the signals that I use to buy, and that's a strategy I have called a superhero. We do these just about every day, looking for them on those low float abnormal stocks. Now, when do you sell? Well, in this case, the stock moved up very quickly. They don't often move up that fast. There's two choices for sell signals. Because this moved up so quick, you can sell when this very steep upward trend is broken right there. Or you can wait for the build of the falling top and sell on the breakdown from the falling top. Now, why would you do this when you could have sold a little higher? Well, the reason is because stocks will often go up, pull back, and then break to the upside again. And that's what you saw here is the move up, the pullback, and then the break, but that break didn't resolve with new highs. Instead, we got the breakdown from the falling top, and that was our second sell signal. So, very simply, focus on those low float stocks. Make sure that they're trading abnormal volume. It's not enough for you to just trade stocks that have a low float. You have to trade the low float stocks that have very abnormal volume, very liquid. And that's one of the things that I'll cover in these webinars that are coming up this week. They're an hour long. I'm going to go in depth on how to read charts Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Saturday. So make sure you're registered to those at Stockscores.com. I hope you've enjoyed this video, found it valuable. If so, click the like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. These are being done every week, and you'll learn something new with each video. Hope you've enjoyed it, and trade well.